Does everyone here remember early YouTube? That's a rhetorical question. Of course I know you do, but I needed an introduction to this video, so I'm asking for you to just go along with it, okay? You don't? Well, it was much different than the corporate landscape that you see at the forefront of the website nowadays. In the early 2010s, the most popular creators were just people in front of their terrible cameras doing what they wanted to have fun with. There were still people who indulged in stuff you see as commonplace today, such as gaming, vlogging, and reactionary content, but there was a giant side of YouTube that was arguably at the head of the platform, and that is sketch comedy. Some of the early giants such as Nigahiga, Smosh, Fred, and the guy that I just made a video on, focused their content around sketches and managed to gain an incredible amount of longevity doing so. People like Kyle Mooney and Beck Bennett even managed to gain enough notoriety from their comedy to hit the big time on Saturday Night Live. However, as time passed on and we entered the latter half of the 2010s, most sketch comedy channels either progressed onto new types of content, became stale and started making the same thing over and over again, or just disappeared off the face of the earth. I think it's safe to say that in the year 2016, there were very few people logging onto YouTube and saying, "Oh boy, I can't wait to watch my favorite sketch comedian after a futile day of getting bullied mercilessly at school." Last part was only me. Fair enough. Anyways, that sentiment was changed for not only me, but a large group of people the following year, as through the trending page and YouTube recommendations, an exponential amount of people were introduced to one of the pioneers of the sketch comedy renaissance that we have been seeing recently, and that person is Gus Johnson. Although Gus had only started gaining prominence in 2017, he has been making content for roughly 10 years now. And although music played a big role in his earlier days on the site, the most consistent aspect has definitely been sketch comedy. He hit his stride in 2017 and has only continued rising upwards over the next couple of years, going from 100,000 to almost 2.3 million subscribers at the current moment. Now, I know I haven't really gone over my argument and I focused more than I usually do on the backstory of both Gus and sketch comedy as an entity, and the reason for that is that it actually plays a part in my argument that Gus Johnson was a catalyst for the revolution of sketch comedy on the platform. Is that one of the bigger claims that I have ever made on this channel? Yeah. Am I about to back it up with the rest of the video essay like I usually do? Also yes. Has this little question and answer segment gone on far too long? Absolutely. So the first thing that I think Gus has going for him as opposed to most of the older sketch creators is an actual personality. I know this sounds a little bit harsh, but it's unfortunately the reality of the situation. The majority of comedy put onto the site from the early to mid 2010s tended to revolve around the main characters, and all of the sketches being put into very awkward situations that would do the majority of the comedic lifting. As much as I have commended them in the past, an example of this is definitely Smosh. The majority of their content back then, and even somewhat to this day, centers around either an existing property that people can relate to and find humor in, or an absurdist situation. The problem that comes of this, or at least the problem for myself, is that it leads to a lack of characterization of the people behind the channel. For example, if you were to be asked, "What's funny about Smosh?" you could cite the aforementioned aspects I discussed. Yet, if you were to be asked, "What's funny about Ian?" or "What's funny about Anthony?" there would be more of a struggle to grasp at something there. In direct contrast, if you were to ask me what is so funny about Gus, I would have a multitude of answers ready to fire off within seconds. One of the big factors that I attribute to him is the idea of acting in character, and loads of them at that. I'm quite aware that Gus isn't the first person to act in character on YouTube. Trust me, the reason I have completely overlooked Brandon Rogers is because I plan on making an entire video dedicated to him. But if you look at other people in a similar vein, such as Churlies, Trevor Wallace, Ryan the Leader, Stephen Fitzgerald, Casey Frey, and Ian Kung, characters are definitely a major factor in their comedic styles. The main example I would like to look at for Gus is a trilogy of videos he has released that feature a character called Mitchell Robbins, which will bring me to my first point of the video, and that is Gus is actually a good actor. His ability to transform into a variety of people across the spectrum of personality is unmatched by any of his contemporaries, and the people before him, once again except for Brandon Rogers. In the Mitchell Robbins videos, he embodies a frenetic man who finds intense difficulty in completing the most mundane everyday tasks, and as someone who has someone like that in my life, I can attest that it is very similar to moments where she is going through panic attacks over these types of things as well. And not only does he accurately portray said character, but he also manages to spout off fantastic one-liners and perform physical comedy that's perfectly timed. He really commits to every role that he undertakes, no matter how big or small it is, and I genuinely believe that he nails every single one of them. And as that is the perfect transition, another thing that sets Gus apart from the pack is that he actually puts out good comedy in the main three styles, which would be physical, verbal, and situational. For physical, one needs to look no further than the Imbiemba Jones trilogy that resides on his channel, where he has absolutely zero lines of dialogue and relies solely on his body language and interactions with his environment to get across his humor. And boy, does it work. He perfectly emits the aura of an introverted yet chaotic kindergartner on their first day of summer camp through both grand gestures and small subtleties that are incredibly on point. Next, we have verbal, and well, this applies to mostly everything he does. Verbal is almost self-explanatory, and as I previously mentioned, the amount of memorable one-liners that Gus has in his repertoire is impeccable, to say the least. However, the final type of comedy, which I think is generally overlooked at a criminal rate, is arguably Gus's strongest. When it comes to situational comedy in this new wave of sketch comedy, I've observed that people generally stick to videos that have current cultural or societal connections. And while I can't blame them for doing so, it can definitely come off as repetitive sometimes. However, Gus seems to have a knack for creating innovative situations and dropping very odd characters in the middle of them. Now, of course, it is essential for me to back up these claims, which I am very excited to do. The first example I would like to bring up is the good old American classic Potato Chip Boys, where Gus and Eddie arrive at a social gathering as chip enforcement officers due to a complaint regarding a lack of neutral chip. Now, maybe I'm a little bit crazy, but to me, that premise automatically draws me in. It's an incredibly unique spin on a very minute problem, which relates to one of the reasons why I think Gus is so successful. He is able to execute relatable comedy in a more abstract manner, as opposed to people like Lele Pons, King Batch, and Hannah Stocking, who just essentially state the basics of the situation and attempt to pass that off as their comedy. If someone like the people I just brought up were to make a sketch similar to Potato Chip Boys, it would very likely just be them stating something along the lines of this. Haha, sick party. Where chips? Over here. One bag of sour cream and onion, beat up party host. With some type of sexual promiscuity integrated at one of the steps there. And in addition to being able to do good, general, relatable comedy, he also shows proficiency in more specific situational comedy. If I was going to show you a video and I told you the title was If John Wilkes Booth Had Sneezed, would you be on board? Because I know that if the roles were reversed, I absolutely would. Now, all of this sounds great, but there is still a rather important ace up my sleeve that I was saving until the very end of the video, and I feel like now would be an apt time to bring it out. One thing that I have observed from the OG sketch channels, again with few exceptions, that I would consider a detriment is that their videos generally end up being repetitive due to repeated joke structure, style, or payoff within a singular video. So, how does Gus manage to avoid his content getting stale and draw in millions of Gen Z and millennial viewers simultaneously? Simple. In the past 2 years, when he really started to see a rise in popularity, he has put out one sketch video that has a runtime over 5 minutes, and the majority of them fall under 2. Gus doesn't give himself time to get stale. He's on your screen one moment and then he's off the next. And before you know it, you're replaying the video over and over again because of how bite-sized, digestible, and entertaining it is. The internet generation was raised to expect everything to have instant gratification, and Gus's videos provide exactly that. And because of the replayability that they have a high probability of getting onto the trending page almost every time. Even from the beginning of his rise, Gus would constantly get onto trending and even made multiple videos about being confused in regards to why it was such a reoccurring thing. That leads me into the very last statement, and one that I think needs to be recognized more than it generally is, which is, Gus just seems like a really genuine person. While most YouTubers in the millions seem to have a superiority complex about them, and that even goes for some that I enjoy watching, Gus always comes off as incredibly humble and in awe of the success that he has garnered on the platform. Whenever he successfully ventures into another medium, he always shows his gratitude and appreciation, all the while maintaining a vibe of disbelief and determination. It's something that I rarely see in creators. But just another reason why Gus Johnson is the new face of sketch comedy on YouTube. And we better get used to it. Thank you guys so much for watching. First and foremost, I would like to thank our patron Weston Katecki and our producer AJ Ford. If you have any interest in joining the ranks, the link to our revamped Patreon is in the description. We also have the link to our Twitch, Twitter, and podcast Banter for Two there as well if you have any interest in following any of them. I want to thank everyone for their patience and the amazing support that we have been receiving on our stuff. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.